In 2018, Estes, the company that put over 1 million rocket motors into American backyards by 1965, nearly vanished overnight. Its parent company collapsed into bankruptcy. The hobbyist base had cratered from 1.2 million to 400,000. Average lot sizes had shrunk so small you could barely recover a rocket. And kids were logging 4 hours a day on screens instead of counting down launches. Every force that made model rocketry a backyard ritual was quietly eroding. But Estes survived, not on nostalgia, and not by accident. To understand how, you have to go back to a single machine, built in a basement in 1958, that solved a problem most people never knew existed. Before there was a factory in Penrose, before the catalogs made their way into kitchen drawers and school desks across the country, model rocketry lived and died by the hands of its earliest believers. In basements and garages, hobbyists measured black powder by eye and tamped it into cardboard tubes with wooden rods. Each motor was its own experiment, no two exactly alike. The line between flight and failure was thin, sometimes invisible. On launch days, the anticipation ran high, but so did the risk. A single flaw in packing or a slight gap in the casing could turn excitement into a small explosion. According to club logs from the late 1950s, 1 out of every 5 to 10 launches ended with a ruptured case or a misfire. The numbers were stark, a 10 to 15% failure rate, with each motor's thrust swinging wildly, sometimes by as much as 30% from one engine to the next. For the kids who lined up to watch, and the parents who worried from porches, the danger was not theoretical. A casing failure meant shrapnel and flame, and the memory of accidents in the news made some families ban rockets outright. Early hobby magazines documented these failures with a mix of bravado and caution, printing letters from readers who had lost fingers, or worse, their nerve. The National Association of Rocketry, still young and finding its footing, struggled to recommend any engine as truly safe. The homemade approach kept the hobby small, expensive, and always on the edge of being outlawed. Yet the hunger to launch never faded. Clubs shared tips for safer packing, but even the best advice could not overcome the limits of hand filling. Quality control was mostly wishful thinking. Some batches burned too fast, others sputtered and fell short. Visual inspection and the occasional drop test were the only lines of defense. The result was a culture of improvisation and risk, where every launch was a gamble. The promise of space was there, but so was the threat of injury and disappointment. In this uncertain landscape, the need for a new approach became impossible to ignore. The next step would require more than a clever kit or a catchy slogan. It would take a leap in process, a way to make every motor as safe and predictable as the dreams they carried. The future of the hobby depended on it, and somewhere in a cluttered basement, Vern Estes was already sketching out a solution, searching for a way to turn fragile hope into disciplined wonder. The question lingered: could rocketry ever become routine, or would it always be a thrill balanced on the edge of risk? Mabel did not look like a machine that would change American childhood, but her insides told a different story. In the cramped workshop, Vern Estes built her from scratch, chasing a vision that precision could tame the wildness of backyard rockets. The heart of the machine was the pneumatic feeder, a system that measured black powder granules into the die with the steadiness of a watchmaker's hand. Each charge, metered by air pressure, landed in the same spot, grain after grain, launch after launch. No more guessing, no more clumps or gaps. Next came the screw ram, a thick steel shaft that pressed the powder with a force that could crumple a car fender, 400 pounds per square inch every time. Vern's patent drawings show the spiral thread of the ram, turning with mechanical patience, compressing the propellant so evenly that the difference between motors dropped to 1/10 of a millimeter. The rotating die did more than just hold the powder. It auto-wound the grain, shaping it into a perfect cylinder, eliminating the ragged edges and air pockets that doomed so many hand-packed engines. The casing system worked in sync. Cardboard tubes unspooled from a reel, sliced to exact length by a guillotine blade, then crimped shut by a pneumatic seal head. The seal itself was calibrated, a radial squeeze that closed the tube without crushing it, locking in the charge and preventing the leaks that had once sent flames sideways on the launch pad. Vern's notes mention tube tolerances of plus or minus 1/100th of a millimeter, a figure that would not be out of place in an aerospace plant. Inspection was not left to chance. Each finished motor rolled past an optical sensor that checked diameter and wall thickness. Motors that missed the mark by even a hair were shunted aside by a rejection chute. No second chances, no wishful thinking. A load cell rig applied 10 pounds of force to every case, logging the results on punch cards for statistical control. For the first time, a hobbyist's rocket engine was more than a lucky shot. It was a product of data, discipline, and relentless iteration. Mabel's hum filled the shop, but the real noise was in the numbers. With every cycle, the margin for error shrank, and the line between hope and safety began to blur. Yet even as the process tightened, the question lingered. Could this new ritual of certainty really replace the old thrill of improvisation? Or was something essential being traded away in the name of progress? Mabel's arrival in Penrose did not just change the rhythm of one workshop. It rewrote the scale of the entire hobby. In a matter of months, the Estes factory shifted from producing a few thousand motors a year to churning out more than 1 million by 1965. What had been a fragile, almost secretive pastime became a reliable ritual, measured in shipping crates instead of coffee cans. The numbers tell the story. Before automation, every batch risked disaster, with failure rates hovering around 10%. After Mabel, that figure collapsed. By the mid-1960s, only 1 in 10,000 motors would rupture, a safety record that rivaled commercial fireworks and even some industrial pyrotechnics. Factory logs from the first full production year document the leap. Each worker, once a craftsman hunched over a manual press, now became a steward of the process, monitoring gauges and punch cards instead of guessing by touch, and insisting on precision. The pneumatic feeder and screw ram did not tire, did not drift from their settings. Every 3 seconds, a finished motor dropped onto the conveyor, indistinguishable from the last. The rejection chute, once a rare sight in hobby manufacturing, became a symbol of new standards. Motors that failed the load cell test, no matter how slight the defect, were set aside without sentiment. For the first time, parents and teachers could trust that a child's launch would be safe, predictable, and repeatable. The National Association of Rocketry, which had once hesitated to endorse any engine, began citing Estes' data as the gold standard. Insurance companies, once wary, loosened their restrictions. School districts that had banned rockets now ordered bulk packs for science fairs. The cost per motor dropped by 80%, opening the hobby to a new generation of families who had never considered it before. Trust spread alongside accessibility. Yet, behind the hum of the machines and the precision of the process, something more subtle took root. The workers in Penrose, many of them local, some family, spoke of pride in numbers, of knowing that their hands, their watchfulness, made every launch possible. Vern's achievement was echoed in their routines, not just mass production, but the careful stewardship of disciplined wonder. As the shipping crates left Penrose, bound for basements and schoolyards across the country, the question lingered in the quiet. Could this new scale, this new safety, preserve the spirit that made backyard spaceflight feel personal? Or would something essential be lost, even as the numbers soared? In the autumn of 1958, American newspapers ran breathless headlines about Sputnik and the new frontier overhead. Children clipped out rocket diagrams from the Sunday supplements, while parents, still wary from stories of backyard mishaps, found themselves swept up in a national fever. The passage of the National Defense Education Act that September was more than a budget line. It was a call to arms for teachers, who suddenly had federal backing to bring rocketry and engineering into the classroom. School boards ordered new textbooks with chapters on orbits and propulsion, and science fairs filled with projects titled Solid Fuel Engine Design or Trajectory Calculations. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration Act, signed in July, gave the space program a permanent seat at the table of public imagination. Rocket launches became must-see television. CBS and NBC aired weekly science hours where NASA engineers explained thrust and recovery with models that look suspiciously like the ones soon to appear in Estes catalogs. In living rooms and classrooms, the boundary between play and patriotism blurred. The Redstone and Mercury silhouettes, once classified, now adorned magazine covers and model kits, fueling a sense that every child could hold a piece of the national mission in their hands. Teachers became unlikely evangelists. With National Defense Education Act grants in hand, they ordered bulk packs of engines and body tubes, transforming after-school clubs into miniature launch ranges. Membership in the National Association of Rocketry doubled in a year. The American Toy Association tracked a surge. Annual sales of rocket-related toys jumped from $2 million in 1956 to $15 million by 1962. Estes, barely a year old, captured 70% of that growth, its safe, repeatable engines making the difference between a banned hazard and an approved classroom experiment. For students, the ritual became familiar, assembling a kit at the kitchen table, measuring fins, threading recovery wadding, and waiting for the countdown. In these moments, the country's technological ambitions became personal, tactile, and real. Yet, as rockets soared from playgrounds and schoolyards, a quiet question remained. Could this sense of shared wonder survive if the world moved on? Or would it fade as quickly as the headlines? Penrose, Colorado, sat quietly on the prairie, a town of ranches and irrigation ditches, until 1961. That year, Vern Estes moved his rocket company here, drawn not by the price of land, but by the promise of space, room to test, to fail, and to build something lasting. On 77 acres at the edge of town, the Estes factory rose, corrugated metal buildings beside a windswept test range, surrounded by open fields and cottonwoods. The plant became more than a workplace. It was a place where the ordinary could touch the extraordinary, where the hum of machinery mixed with the prairie wind and the scent of cardboard and black powder hung in the air. Inside, local men and women, many new to manufacturing, learned to monitor gauges, log punch cards, and 10 machines with a care that turned routine into ritual. Oral histories remember the rhythm of the line, a finished motor dropping every 3 seconds, the steady click of the rejection chute, the pride in a spotless safety record posted in the break room. For some, the job was a steady paycheck. For others, it was a source of identity. The work was repetitive, but it carried the weight of trust. Each engine, each tube, each kit was a promise that the dream of flight could be safe and real. Outside, the test range stretched past the factory, marked by launch pads and battered stands. Here, new engines faced their trials in full view of the crew. Failures were studied, successes logged in thick binders. The land itself absorbed the noise and risk, grounding the brand's reputation for reliability in something tangible. Estes catalogs from the early 1960s leaned into this sense of place. Photos of the factory, the open range, even the family dog lounging beside a stack of kits. To kids across the country, Penrose became more than a dot on a map. It was the birthplace of rockets, where safety was a daily practice and wonder was made by ordinary hands. Every box that left Penrose carried a piece of that landscape, a whisper of small-town confidence, and the promise that the backyard could reach the sky. A mailbox on a quiet street, a thick envelope with the Estes logo, and a world of possibility landing with the morning bills. By the mid-1960s, more than 260,000 catalogs were shipped each year, each one a passport to a parallel universe where spaceflight belonged to anyone with a kitchen table and a little patience. For many kids, the catalog wasn't just a shopping guide, it was a ritual. Pages were studied, corners dog-eared, and new rocket kits circled in pencil. The layout itself invited dreaming, full-color spreads of Mercury Atlas and Redstone replicas, technical diagrams next to aspirational taglines, "Build the rocket that will take America to the moon," and checklists that promised a flight path from beginner to master. Product descriptions read like invitations to join a secret society. Copywriters borrowed the language of NASA press releases, describing boosters as precision-engineered, recovery systems as fail-safe, and even the smallest parts as authentic. The effect was more than marketing. For a generation raised on televised launches and Sunday magazine features about the space race, these catalogs became shared memory objects. They traveled from mailbox to bedroom walls, from kitchen counters to school desks, and sometimes into the hands of teachers looking for the next science fair project. Shopping lists formed in the margins, built from allowance money and birthday wishes. Friends traded catalogs at recess, comparing plans and arguing over which kit was most likely to break the school altitude record. In small towns and big cities alike, the arrival of a new catalog marked the start of a season, a fresh cycle of anticipation, building, and flight. The scale of this reach was unprecedented for a hobby brand. At its peak, Estes catalogs connected hundreds of thousands of kids, parents, and teachers, turning isolated backyard launches into a national ritual. Yet behind the glossy covers and the promise of disciplined wonder, a quiet question lingered in the margins. Could a printed dream keep its hold when the world outside the mailbox began to move faster, and the rituals of patience and making face new kinds of competition? A small embossed label on an Estes motor told a story that stretched far beyond Penrose. It read like a contract, Class A83, certified impulse, batch code, and by the early 1970s, a compliance notice referencing the Consumer Product Safety Commission Rule 16C. For parents and teachers, this language was more than fine print. It was a promise that the rocket in a child's hand had passed through layers of scrutiny, not just the steady gaze of a Penrose line worker, but the evolving standards of a country learning to weigh risk against wonder. The move to formal safety codes did not happen overnight. Engineers in the Estes plant worked with the National Association of Rocketry to define what a standard motor meant. 13mm and 18mm tubes, fixed delay charges, and a thrust curve that could be charted, not guessed. Each engine carried a serial number linking it to a specific production run, logged against punch cards and later digital records. By 1974, every package included a printed safety code, the first of its kind in the hobby, to satisfy the Consumer Product Safety Commission's new toy regulations. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, Rule 16C, required not just warnings, but proof, statistical testing, documented failure rates, and a guarantee that no child would find a rogue batch in the bottom of a kit box. These safeguards did more than quiet anxious parents. They allowed school districts to classify rockets as safe educational tools, not prohibited fireworks. Insurance companies, once hesitant, began to cover launches. The result was a subtle but profound shift. Rocketry became a managed ritual, something that could be trusted in the hands of a scout troop or a classroom of fifth graders. The risk that once kept the hobby in the shadows became a measured variable, never absent, but now accounted for. Yet with every new rule and every new label, a question lingered. Could the ritual of flight remain personal and thrilling, or would it be tamed into just another supervised activity, safe but stripped of its edge? A child's first brush with an Estes kit was never just a toy. It was a brush with history, scaled for the backyard. The designers in Penrose took their cues not from fantasy, but from the launch pads of Cape Canaveral and the pages of NASA's technical manuals. Each replica kit, from the Redstone to the Mercury Atlas, was shaped to echo the real machines that carried astronauts into the unknown. The proportions, the fin shapes, even the paint schemes drew on official NASA technical notes, translated into plastic and balsa and thin-walled tubing. The Redstone silhouette, reproduced under a limited use license from the United States Air Force, gave the model an authenticity that set it apart from the generic rockets of the toy aisle. Inside the design office, engineers pored over schematics and launch footage, searching for the details that would let a kitchen table build feel like a piece of the national story. The goal was never just flight, but connection, to let a child's hands follow the same steps as the ones traced by aerospace engineers. The ritual of assembly became a quiet act of aspiration, measuring, gluing, painting, and finally launching a miniature version of the rocket that once thundered skyward on live television. This link between model and mission gave the kits a gravity beyond their weight. Pride came not just from altitude or recovery, but from the sense of participating in something larger, a private echo of public achievement. Yet as the world outside changed, a question gathered at the edge of each launch. Could this sense of belonging, to history and to wonder, hold its shape when the rockets on TV began to fade from view? A launch begins long before ignition. It starts in quiet bedrooms and cluttered garages, where hands sort through balsa fins and checklists, where patience is measured in glue, drying hours, and the careful threading of recovery wadding. The ritual is as old as the hobby itself. Build, wait, launch, recover. Each step carries its own anticipation, a disciplined choreography that draws out the moment of flight. The countdown, called aloud or whispered under breath, is a shared language. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then a brief silence, a hiss, and the sky claims another small promise. But the ritual doesn't end with a single launch. Across the country, clubs gather on school fields and empty lots, their launch pads arranged in neat rows, clipboards ready for inspection. Rules are strict: no engine above Class C without certification, recovery system checked, range safety officer in place. The launch checklist, once a private habit, becomes a collective contract. No one lights a fuse until every box is ticked. In these moments, the hobby transforms into community. Parents swap stories at the edge of the range. Veterans teach newcomers how to balance a rocket on its center of gravity, how to log each flight in a battered notebook. The National Association of Rocketry Annual Meet, NARAM, turns this cycle into celebration. Hundreds of hobbyists, some third generation, travel across states to compete, to trade stories, to witness record flights and spectacular failures. Competition rules are debated late into the night. The culture is one of continuity, not just achievement. Each NARAM is a reunion of ritual, a living scaffold built on the slow, careful rhythms that once defined the whole hobby. Yet as the countdown echoes over the field, a question lingers. How long can these rituals hold their shape when the world outside moves ever faster? By the early 2000s, the quiet hum of the Penrose factory was no longer enough to guarantee a future. Hobby stores shuttered, foot traffic slipped, and the rituals of patient assembly lost ground to the quick tap of a touchscreen. But in school classrooms, a different kind of launch was taking shape. Teachers, looking for ways to spark hands-on learning, began ordering Estes bulk packs, class sets of Alpha and E2X rockets, bundled with launch pads, controllers, and thick packets of lesson plans. The new STEM line, introduced in 2004, was more than a rebrand. Each kit arrived with teacher guides mapped to science standards, printable worksheets, and online modules that let flight logs turn into data tables and graphs. Lessons covered everything from Newton's third law to altitude tracking with AltiTrack, inviting students to chart a rocket's arc from ground to sky and back to notebook. The results showed up in the numbers. Within a year, school orders rose by nearly 20%, driven by districts in Texas, California, and the Midwest, piloting full-grade launches. More than 1,200 schools added Estes kits to their curriculum in 2008 alone. In the classroom, the old values of patience and mechanical curiosity found new life. Students built, measured, launched, and recorded, learning that science could be both tactile and precise. For educators, Estes became less a toy supplier and more a partner in building scientific confidence, one launch at a time. Yet outside the classroom, the world kept speeding up, and the old rituals faced fresh headwinds. The question lingered, could a curriculum buffer insulate the spirit of disciplined wonder, or was the clock still ticking on the backyard rocket era? A backyard used to mean open sky, a patch of grass, and the promise of a safe launch. In the 1970s, the average American home sat on 1/5 of an acre, enough room for a launch rod, a cautious circle of friends, and a parent watching from the porch. But as decades passed, the ground beneath those rituals shrank. The numbers tell the story. By 2024, the median suburban lot had dwindled to just 0.07 acres, less than half the space of a generation before. New subdivisions rose where old fields stretched, houses pressed closer together, and fences marked boundaries that rockets could no longer safely cross. For families, the change was more than a matter of square footage. Launches that once happened on a whim now required negotiation, permission from neighbors, careful checks for power lines, and sometimes the search for a distant park or school field. Insurance forms and zoning codes began to list model rockets alongside fireworks and drones, recasting a childhood experiment as a potential nuisance or risk. Even in towns that once celebrated backyard launches, the open spaces faded beneath cul-de-sacs and driveways. The ritual of building and launching, once as simple as stepping outside, became tangled in logistics. Parents weighed the thrill of flight against the risk of a rocket landing on a neighbor's roof. Children who might have learned patience and confidence from assembling a kit instead found their ambitions boxed in by the realities of modern density. The backyard, once a launch pad for wonder, became just another constraint. And as the physical space for flight vanished, a quieter question took root. Could the spirit of disciplined wonder survive when the world outside the window kept closing in? 4 hours. That's the average daily screen time for American children ages 8 to 12. As measured by national media use surveys in 2024. It is a number that dwarfs the time spent on any single hands-on activity, let alone the long, quiet arc of building and launching a model rocket. The rituals that once filled afternoons, like sorting balsa fins, gluing tubes, and checking the launch checklist, now compete with the constant pulse of notifications, video streams, and algorithm-driven games. Patience, once a requirement for flight, feels like an outdated skill. This is not just a matter of preference, but of rewired attention. Interactive digital platforms reward speed and instant feedback, teaching children to expect entertainment at the tap of a finger. The slow build, the wait for glue to dry, the careful threading of a recovery line. These steps ask for a kind of focus that modern devices quietly unteach. The model rocket, with its hours of preparation for a few seconds of flight, struggles to hold its ground in a world where gratification is measured in milliseconds. Numbers tell their own story. As screen time climbed past 4 hours a day, membership in model rocketry clubs dropped by 2/3 between 1995 and 2024. Hobby store owners report that kit sales now peak around holidays, then flatten as kits are left unfinished or abandoned for faster diversions. The demand slump is not just about crowded yards or tighter rules. It is about a cultural drift away from tactile making, from the patience that once linked child and sky. And for a company built on the promise of disciplined wonder, the quiet erosion of time and attention is more than a business risk. It's a subtle, daily undoing of the very habits that once made a backyard launch feel like a small act of spaceflight. The question lingers: can any ritual that asks for patience survive in an era that rewards only speed? On March 19, 2018, the phone lines at hobby shops across the country lit up with the same question: where are the engines? Hobbico, one of the largest distributors in the hobby industry and the parent company of Estes since 2010, had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the District of Delaware. The filing listed $70 million in debts and a tangled web of obligations owed to suppliers, to retailers, and to the National Association of Rocketry for pending engine shipments. For the first time in decades, the ritual of the backyard launch was interrupted not by weather or regulation, but by a halt in the supply chain itself. Inside independent hobby shops, the shelves emptied fast. Club presidents called distributors, only to be told that engine blanks and spare parts were stuck in legal limbo. School districts with spring launches on the calendar found their bulk orders unfulfilled. For 6 months, the flow of kits and engines slowed to a trickle. The threat was not just to sales, but to the continuity of the culture itself. Clubs canceled launch days, and the annual rhythm of build, wait, launch, recover was broken. There was no substitute for an Estes engine. The process that Vern Estes pioneered, batch after batch, each one tested and logged, could not be easily replaced. Then, in April, a rescue plan moved at the speed of crisis. On April 23, 2018, Estes Industries Incorporated was purchased out of bankruptcy for $13 million by a private group led by former Hobbico executives. The acquisition included the Penrose facility, the inventory, and the tooling, the physical heart of disciplined wonder. Within weeks, the new owners restored engine production, and by mid-2018, shipments resumed to hobby shops, schools, and clubs. The supply gap closed almost as quickly as it had opened, but the episode left a scar. For a brand built on the promise of reliability, the 2018 Brink exposed just how fragile continuity could be when ownership and distribution faltered. The question lingered in the minds of shopkeepers and club organizers alike: could the ritual survive another shock? Or had the era of backyard spaceflight become as vulnerable as any other supply chain? Today, a generation raised on catalogs and Penrose field launches finds their rituals pressed between tighter regulations and shrinking backyards. Yet in a world rushing toward instant answers, Estes endures by selling not nostalgia, but disciplined wonder, safe, hands-on learning as subversive as ever. The real question is not whether rockets still fly. It is whether we still make room for curiosity that takes patience. That impulse, Vern Estes's true legacy, may be the rarest engine of all. Share your memories below.